The notification on my phone told me I had violated Section 47B of our HOA covenants, and I hadn't even finished my morning coffee yet. I'm Tyler Thompson, and I made the mistake of buying a house in Meadowbrook Estates in Scottsdale, Arizona, 3 years ago. The property was beautiful, the price was right, and I thought the HOA would be one of those hands-off organizations that just made sure nobody painted their house neon green. I was wrong. Dead wrong. The text message came from Brenda Patterson, the HOA president, informing me that I needed to attend an emergency meeting at her house that evening. No explanation, just the demand. I texted back asking what this was about, but got no response. Typical Brenda behavior. She was one of those middle-aged women who treated the HOA like her personal kingdom, complete with subjects to rule over and violations to hand out like candy on Halloween. I spent the day working from home, trying to focus on my software development projects, but the message nagged at me. What could I possibly have violated? My lawn was immaculate. My house was painted the approved shade of beige. My trash cans were never visible from the street. I followed every ridiculous rule they had. At 6 o'clock, I walked the 3 houses down to Brenda's place. Her house was the largest on the block, a sprawling ranch-style home with a professionally maintained yard that probably cost more per month than most people's car payments. I rang the doorbell and heard her yelling at someone inside before she opened the door. "You're late," she said, even though I was right on time. "The message said 6, I replied. "Well, come in then." I followed her through her immaculate living room to a sunroom at the back of her house. Sitting there were 2 other board members, Susan Miller and Carol Henderson, both cut from the same cloth as Brenda. They had that look of bored housewives who had found purpose in making other people's lives difficult. "Tyler, thank you for coming," Susan said with a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Didn't really feel like I had a choice," I said, sitting down in the chair they'd positioned opposite them like this was an interrogation. Brenda pulled out a folder and slapped it on the table. "We've discovered that you've been stealing from the HOA." I actually laughed. "Stealing? What are you talking about? Your greenhouse," Carol said, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "It's connected to the main gas line that the HOA pays for. My greenhouse." I was genuinely confused. "I don't have a greenhouse." Brenda opened the folder and pulled out several photos. "This greenhouse attached to the back of your property." I looked at the photos and immediately understood the confusion. "That's not my greenhouse. That's not even on my property." "It's attached to your back wall," Susan insisted. "My back wall is the property line. That greenhouse is on HOA common property behind my house. I didn't build it and I certainly don't use it." The 3 women exchanged glances. Brenda cleared her throat. "Regardless of who built it, our inspection revealed that it's heated by a gas line that runs from your house. Then someone made a mistake when they built it, because I sure as hell didn't authorize it or build it." Carol pulled out another document. "We've consulted with our attorney, and since the gas line originates from your meter, you're responsible for it." "That's insane," I said, feeling my blood pressure rising. "If someone tapped into my gas line without my permission, that's theft and I want to know who did it." "According to our records," Brenda said, flipping through papers, "the greenhouse was built 5 years ago as a community amenity. The builder must have connected it to your line for convenience." "And you're just now discovering this?" I asked incredulously. "We don't monitor every little detail," Susan said defensively. "Clearly," I muttered. "So let me get this straight. Someone, probably the HOA, built a greenhouse on common property, illegally connected it to my gas line, and now you want to blame me for it." "We're not blaming you," Brenda said in that condescending tone she used when she was absolutely blaming someone. "We're simply asking you to continue covering the heating costs since that's how it's been set up." I stood up. "Absolutely not. That greenhouse isn't mine. I didn't authorize the connection, and I'm not paying to heat HOA property. Disconnect it from my line." "The gas company says that would cost about $3,000, Carol said. "The HOA doesn't have that in the budget right now." "Not my problem," I said, heading toward the door. "Tyler, sit down. We're not finished," Brenda commanded. I turned back to face her. "Yeah, we are. You want me to pay for something I didn't build, don't use, and didn't authorize? The answer is no. Fix your own mistake." "If you don't cooperate, we'll have to fine you," Susan threatened. "For what? I haven't violated anything. You violated my property by tapping into my gas line without permission. I could probably sue the HOA for theft of services." That shut them up for a moment. Brenda's face turned red. "Are you threatening us?" "I'm stating facts. I'm going home now. Don't contact me about this again unless you're telling me you've disconnected that greenhouse from my gas line." I walked out, my hands shaking with anger. The audacity of these women was unbelievable. I got home and immediately started looking through my property records, utility bills, and anything else that might tell me more about this greenhouse situation. My gas bills had always seemed a bit high, but I'd attributed it to Arizona's cold winter nights. Now I was wondering how much I'd been paying to heat a greenhouse I didn't even know existed. I went out to my back wall and walked along it until I found the greenhouse. Sure enough, there it was, a decent-sized structure with glass panels, currently full of plants and vegetables. I followed the gas line and found where it connected to the main line coming from my meter. It was a professional installation, not some jury-rigged setup, which meant someone had paid good money to do this. I took photos of everything, documenting the connection and the greenhouse itself. The next morning, I called the gas company. After being transferred 3 times, I finally got someone who could help me. "Sir, any modifications to gas lines need to be authorized by the property owner," the representative told me. "If someone connected to your line without permission, that's illegal. Can you tell me when this connection was made? Let me check your account history." I heard typing. "It looks like there was a service call about 5.5 years ago. A permit was pulled for extending the line to a greenhouse structure. The permit was approved and signed." "Signed by who?" "The account holder at the time. Let me see. William Morrison. That was the guy I'd bought the house from. Can you email me a copy of that permit?" "Sure. Give me your email address." 20 minutes later, I was looking at the permit. William Morrison's signature was on it, but there was a note in the margin that said, "Per HOA request for community greenhouse project." So the HOA had asked the previous owner to allow the connection, and he'd apparently agreed. But that agreement died when he sold the house. I certainly hadn't agreed to anything. I called a lawyer that afternoon. His name was Marcus Chen, and he specialized in property disputes and HOA issues. After hearing my story and looking at the documents I'd scanned and emailed him, he gave me his assessment. "You're absolutely in the right here," Marcus said. "The agreement was between Morrison and the HOA. When you purchased the property, any such agreement would need to be disclosed and continued with your consent. Since it wasn't in any of the sale documents, you have no obligation to continue it. So I can just disconnect it. Legally, yes. But I'd recommend sending the HOA a formal letter first, giving them 30 days to disconnect at their expense. If they don't, then you can disconnect it yourself. This way, if they try to sue you or fine you, you have documentation that you gave them fair warning. That works. Can you draft that letter? I'll have it ready by tomorrow." The letter was delivered to Brenda, Susan, and Carol 3 days later via certified mail. It outlined the situation clearly. They had 30 days to disconnect the greenhouse from my gas line, or I would disconnect it myself. The letter also demanded reimbursement for the past 3 years of gas usage attributable to the greenhouse, which Marcus had calculated based on average greenhouse heating costs in Arizona. I got a response within a week, but not the one I expected. Instead of agreeing to disconnect, the HOA sent me a violation notice. According to them, I was in violation of Section 47B, which required homeowners to maintain any structures attached to their property. Since the greenhouse was attached to my back wall, they claimed it was my responsibility to maintain it, including keeping it heated. The circular logic was infuriating. They'd built the greenhouse, tapped my gas line, and now claimed I had to maintain it because it touched my property wall. I forwarded everything to Marcus. His response was simple. Let them play their games. We have the law on our side. Proceed with disconnection after the 30-day period. Those 30 days felt like 30 years. I kept checking my mailbox for any indication that the HOA was taking responsibility, but nothing came. Instead, I got 2 more violation notices, each threatening fines of $100 per day if I didn't comply with Section 47B. I ignored them. Marcus had advised me to keep all the notices but not respond directly to avoid giving them any ammunition. We were building a case, and the more unreasonable they were, the better it looked for us. During this time, I did some research on the greenhouse itself. It turned out that several neighbors used it. I talked to Jim Brennan, who lived 4 houses down, and he told me that Brenda had organized the greenhouse as a community garden project. About 6 or 7 residents grew vegetables there, and Brenda used a section for her exotic orchids. I wondered who was paying to heat it, Jim said. Those orchids of Brenda's need it warm even in winter. I just grow tomatoes and peppers in summer, so I didn't think much about it. Did you know it was connected to my gas line? I had no idea. That's pretty messed up, Tyler. You should definitely disconnect it, planning on it. Jim frowned. Brenda's going to lose her mind. Those orchids are her pride and joy. She's won awards for them. Should have thought about that before tapping my gas line without permission. The 30 days ended on a Thursday. I took the day off work and called a licensed plumber I'd found who was willing to disconnect the line. His name was Robert Hayes, and he'd dealt with HOA situations before. You've got all your documentation in order? Robert asked when he arrived. Everything. My lawyer has copies too. Good. Because I guarantee someone's going to call the cops or try to stop us. He was right. We'd been working for about 20 minutes when Brenda came storming across the common area toward us. What do you think you're doing? She shrieked. Disconnecting the unauthorized connection to my gas line, I said calmly. You can't do that. That's HOA property. The greenhouse is HOA property. The gas line is mine. You were given 30 days' notice to handle this yourself. I'll call the police. Go ahead, Robert said, not looking up from his work. What he's doing is completely legal. Brenda pulled out her phone and actually did call the police. While we waited, Susan and Carol showed up too, along with 3 other neighbors who used the greenhouse. They stood there watching us work, muttering among themselves. 2 Scottsdale police officers arrived about 15 minutes later. Brenda rushed over to them, talking rapidly and pointing at us. The officers walked over, looking tired, like they'd dealt with HOA disputes before and weren't thrilled about it. Sir, can you tell us what's going on? The older officer asked me. I explained the situation clearly and calmly, showing them the documentation I'd brought. The permit from 5 years ago. the letter from my lawyer, the violation notices from the HOA, and the property records showing the greenhouse was on common property, not mine. The officer looked it over and then turned to Brenda. "Madam, it appears this gentleman has the right to disconnect this line. It's his gas service and he didn't authorize this connection. But the greenhouse will get cold. My orchids will die. That's not a police matter, madam. This is a civil issue between you and the homeowner, and it appears he's within his rights." "This is ridiculous. Officer, he's destroying HOA property," the younger officer spoke up. "He's disconnecting his own gas service from a structure he doesn't own. That's not destruction of property." Brenda looked like she was about to explode. Her face was bright red, and her hands were clenched into fists. "You haven't heard the end of this, Tyler. The HOA will sue you for everything you've got." "Looking forward to it," I said. The officers stayed until Robert finished the disconnection, probably to make sure things didn't escalate. Once the line was capped off and properly sealed, Robert packed up his tools. "That should do it," he said. "You're no longer connected to that greenhouse at all." I paid Robert and thanked him. The police left, and I went back to my house, leaving Brenda and her group standing by the greenhouse. Through my back window, I could see them examining the disconnected line like they couldn't believe what had just happened. The temperature that night dropped to 38 degrees, not freezing, but cold enough. Over the next week, temperatures would drop further. Arizona winters aren't brutally cold, but we do get freezing nights, especially in January. For 3 days, nothing happened. I went to work, came home, and enjoyed my life. My gas bill would be lower next month, which was a nice bonus. Then, on Sunday morning, I woke up to find my front door egged and my mailbox knocked over. There was no proof it was HOA related, but the timing was suspicious. I filed a police report, mostly for documentation purposes, and cleaned up the mess. I also installed a security camera system that day, pointing cameras at my front door, driveway, and the back wall where the greenhouse was located. Monday evening, I got an email from Marcus. "The HOA has filed a lawsuit against you for destruction of property and breach of covenant. We need to meet." I went to his office Tuesday morning. Marcus had the complaint printed out and walked me through it. The HOA was claiming I had destroyed their greenhouse by cutting off heat, that I had breached my covenant obligations to maintain attached structures, and they were seeking $20,000 in damages plus attorney fees. "This is actually good for us," Marcus said, seeing my concerned expression. "They're overreaching dramatically. We'll file a countersuit for theft of services for the past 3 years, plus legal fees, plus damages for harassment." "How much are we talking?" "Based on typical greenhouse heating costs, probably around $4,000 for the 3 years you've been paying. Plus we can argue for punitive damages given their behavior. And with their lawsuit being frivolous, we can likely get their suit dismissed and get them to pay our legal fees too. So we're really doing this, full litigation, unless they drop it, yes. But Tyler, I think we can win this pretty decisively. They've made several critical mistakes, and their own documentation proves they're in the wrong." Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated. The HOA sent me 5 more violation notices for various made-up infractions. My trash can was supposedly visible from the street at 6:45 a.m. on a Tuesday, 15 minutes before the allowed time. My lawn was allegedly half an inch taller than the permitted height. My house number wasn't properly reflective according to their standards. Each violation came with a $100 fine. I ignored them all and forwarded everything to Marcus. Meanwhile, the greenhouse plants were struggling. I could see through my security cameras that Brenda was out there every day, frantically trying to save her orchids. She'd brought in space heaters, but they couldn't keep up with the nighttime temperatures, which were now regularly dropping below freezing. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Wednesday in late January, and the weather forecast predicted temperatures in the low 20s. I went to bed around 11, not thinking much about it. At 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of my security system's alarm. Someone was in my backyard. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera feeds. 2 figures were at my gas meter, working on something with flashlights. I called 911 immediately. There are 2 people tampering with my gas meter right now. The dispatcher took my information and sent officers. While I waited, I watched the cameras. The 2 figures were definitely reconnecting the gas line to the greenhouse. I couldn't see their faces clearly, but one of them was wearing a white puffy coat that looked very similar to one I'd seen Brenda wearing. I went downstairs, but didn't go outside. I wasn't about to confront potentially dangerous people in the middle of the night. Instead, I watched through my kitchen window until the police arrived about 8 minutes later. The 2 people tried to run when they saw the police lights, but they didn't get far. Officers caught both of them in the common area. As they were led back toward the patrol cars, I could see clearly now. It was Brenda and her husband, Richard. I went outside to talk to the officers. They asked me to explain what had happened, and I showed them the camera footage on my phone. The video clearly showed Brenda and Richard reconnecting the gas line to the greenhouse. They disconnected it without permission, one officer asked. No, I disconnected it legally after they'd been stealing my gas for 3 years. They're trying to reconnect it without my permission. That's not true, Brenda shouted from beside the patrol car. That's HOA property. We have every right to maintain it. Madam, you're tampering with someone else's utility connection in the middle of the night, the officer said. That's illegal regardless of your dispute. Richard, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. Officer, this is just a misunderstanding between neighbors. Can't we work this out without arrests? You broke into someone's yard and tampered with their gas line at 2 in the morning, the other officer said. This goes beyond a neighborly dispute. I provided the officers with copies of all my documentation. The disconnection authorization, the lawyer's letters, the previous police report from when they'd supervised the legal disconnection. It took about an hour, but eventually, Brenda and Richard were arrested for criminal trespassing and tampering with utility equipment. As they were being put into separate patrol cars, Brenda looked at me with pure hatred. You're going to regret this, Tyler. The HOA will destroy you. I just shook my head and went back inside. I watched through the window as the police took statements from other neighbors who'd come out to see what was happening. One of the officers came back to my door before they left. Sir, you should know that tampering with gas lines is serious. We're going to have to report this to the gas company for a safety inspection, and given the circumstances, we'll be recommending the district attorney press charges. I understand. Thank you for responding so quickly. You might want to consider getting a restraining order against these people. This level of obsession over an HOA dispute isn't normal. I called Marcus first thing in the morning and told him everything. He was quiet for a moment after I finished. This changes everything, he said finally. With criminal charges in play, their civil suit against you becomes almost impossible to maintain. I'll file a motion to dismiss based on their criminal conduct, and we'll file our countersuit immediately. We're also filing for a restraining order today. How bad is this for them legally? Tampering with utility equipment can be a felony depending on the circumstances. Even if it's charged as a misdemeanor, combined with the trespassing, they're looking at potential jail time and definitely probation. And if Brenda's the HOA president, This is going to create all sorts of problems for the association. The gas company came out that morning to inspect everything. They found that Brenda and Richard had done a sloppy job reconnecting the line, creating a potential gas leak. The inspector was furious. This could have caused an explosion, he told me. Whoever did this had no idea what they were doing. The connection isn't sealed properly and they damaged the shut-off valve. The police arrested the people responsible last night. They have it on video. Good. We'll be filing our own complaint with the authorities. This is incredibly dangerous and illegal. The story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By noon, I'd had 6 different neighbors come by or text me asking what had happened. Opinion was split. Some people thought I was being unreasonable about the greenhouse, while others were shocked that Brenda had broken into my yard to tamper with my gas line. Jim Brennan came by that afternoon. "Tyler, I just heard what happened. That's crazy, man. Brenda actually broke into your yard." "Yeah, there's video of the whole thing. Look, I know some of us used that greenhouse, but what she did is way over the line. Most of us had no idea about the gas situation, and honestly, if the HOA needs to pay to heat it properly, that's what should happen. Breaking into your property. That's psychotic." "Thanks, Jim. I appreciate you saying that. There's actually a group of us who are pretty fed up with Brenda's management of the HOA anyway. This might be the push we need to vote her out." That evening, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered it. "Tyler Thompson," a man's voice asked. "Who's this?" "My name is David Patterson. I'm Brenda's brother. I'm calling to ask you to drop the charges against her and Richard." "No," I said simply. "Please just hear me out. Brenda made a mistake, but she's not a criminal. She's just passionate about the community. Those orchids meant a lot to her, and she panicked when they started dying. So she broke into my property and tampered with my gas line, creating a potentially deadly situation. That's not passion, that's criminal behavior. Can't we work something out? What if the HOA pays for the past gas usage and installs a separate line for the greenhouse? Would you drop the charges then? The charges aren't mine to drop. The police and the gas company are pressing them. Your sister committed crimes, and she needs to face the consequences. You're really going to ruin her life over some plants. I'm going to protect my property and my rights. She ruined her own life by breaking the law. Don't call me again." I hung up and blocked the number. The audacity of these people was unbelievable. They'd stolen from me for years, tried to force me to continue paying for their property, broke into my yard, and now wanted me to just forget about it. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I wasn't planning to attend, but Jim texted me that I should come because there was going to be a vote on Brenda's position as president. With criminal charges pending, several board members and homeowners were demanding her resignation. I arrived at the community center to find it packed. Usually, these meetings had maybe 10 people. Tonight, there were at least 40 residents crowded into the room. The tension was palpable. Susan Miller was running the meeting since Brenda wasn't there. This emergency meeting has been called to address recent events involving our HOA president, Brenda Patterson. As most of you know, Brenda was arrested last week on charges related to a dispute with a homeowner. "It wasn't a dispute, it was a crime," someone called out from the back. Susan's face tightened. "The board has reviewed the situation, and we've decided that Brenda should remain as president until the legal matters are resolved." The room erupted. At least a dozen people started talking at once. Jim stood up and raised his voice to be heard. "That's unacceptable. Brenda broke into a homeowner's property and tampered with dangerous equipment. She's facing criminal charges. She needs to step down immediately. The board has made its decision. Carol Henderson said from beside Susan. Then we'll override the board, another homeowner said. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence right now. For the next hour, I watched as the community tore itself apart. Some residents, particularly those who'd been close to Brenda, defended her actions as a misunderstanding. Others were outraged that she'd committed crimes while acting as HOA president. Eventually, a vote was held. By a margin of 28-12, the homeowners voted to remove Brenda as HOA president and from the board entirely. Susan and Carol also faced votes of no confidence, but they survived, barely. Jim was elected as the new HOA president that night. His first action was to address me directly. Tyler, on behalf of the HOA, I want to apologize for how you've been treated. The situation with the greenhouse was handled completely inappropriately from the start. The board will be dropping all violations and fines against you, and we'll be discussing fair compensation for your gas costs. It felt good to hear, but I wasn't ready to let my guard down. I appreciate that, Jim. My lawyer will be in touch. Over the next month, several things happened in quick succession. First, the district attorney decided to charge Brenda and Richard Patterson with criminal trespassing, vandalism, and reckless endangerment related to the gas line tampering. The gas company also filed civil charges against them for the damage to their equipment. Second, the HOA officially dropped their lawsuit against me and sent a formal apology letter drafted by their new attorney. They offered to pay me $5,000 for past gas usage and legal fees. Marcus negotiated them up to $7,500, and I accepted. Third, I filed a civil suit against Brenda and Richard personally for harassment, trespassing, and emotional distress. Marcus was confident we'd win, but he also warned me that collecting might be difficult if they didn't have assets. The criminal trial happened in April. I had to testify, describing the whole situation from the beginning. The prosecutor played the security camera footage of Brenda and Richard reconnecting the gas line, which was damning. The gas company inspector testified about how dangerous their actions were. Brenda's lawyer tried to argue that she'd had permission to maintain the greenhouse and didn't realize she was doing anything wrong. But the prosecutor presented all the documentation showing she'd been told repeatedly that the connection was unauthorized and illegal. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Brenda was found guilty of criminal trespassing and reckless endangerment. Richard was found guilty of criminal trespassing and being an accessory. The vandalism charges were dropped as part of a plea arrangement. At sentencing 2 weeks later, Brenda received 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay restitution to both me and the gas company, totaling $8,000. Richard received 1 year of probation and 100 hours of community service. Additionally, as part of their probation, they were both prohibited from holding any position in any HOA or community organization. Brenda looked broken as the sentence was read. Her whole identity had been wrapped up in controlling the HOA, and now she couldn't even be a member of the board. My civil suit was settled out of court. Their homeowner's insurance ended up covering most of it, and I received $12,000 for my troubles, legal fees, and distress. The greenhouse itself became a point of contention in the community. Some residents wanted to save it and find proper heating for it. Others wanted it torn down entirely. Eventually, Jim and the new board decided to convert it into a cold-frame greenhouse that didn't require heating. They installed proper insulation and ventilation, and it now operates from spring through fall, going dormant in winter. The whole ordeal took about 7 months from start to finish. During that time, I learned a lot about HOA law, property rights, and how quickly people can escalate situations when they feel entitled to control others. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I could have handled it differently. Maybe if I'd been more diplomatic in that first meeting, things wouldn't have gotten so out of hand. But then I remember that they'd been stealing from me for years without my knowledge, and when confronted, they tried to force me to continue paying rather than take responsibility for their mistake. The neighborhood dynamics changed significantly after everything settled down. There was a clear divide between people who'd supported Brenda and those who'd supported me. Some of Brenda's former friends wouldn't even make eye contact with me when I walked by. Others went out of their way to tell me I'd done the right thing. Brenda and Richard still live 4 houses down from me. We've never spoken since the trial. They keep to themselves, and I do the same. Sometimes I see Brenda working in her front garden, and I wonder if she's growing orchids inside her house now, using her own heating bill to keep them alive. Jim turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He focused on actual community improvement rather than petty rule enforcement. He organized neighborhood barbecues, updated the common areas, and generally made Meadowbrook Estates a more pleasant place to live. About a year after everything concluded, Jim and I were having beers on my back patio when he brought up the greenhouse situation. "You know, that whole thing was a wake-up call for a lot of us," he said. "We'd just been going along with whatever Brenda wanted because it was easier than fighting her. Nobody questioned whether she was actually following the rules or acting in the community's best interest. She seemed to genuinely believe she was doing the right thing," I said. "That's what made her so dangerous. She wasn't corrupt in the traditional sense. She just had this vision of what the community should be, and anyone who didn't fit into that vision was the enemy. The worst part is, if she just apologized when you first brought up the gas line issue and worked out a fair solution, none of this would have happened. The HOA could have paid for a proper heating system, or we could have made it a seasonal greenhouse. Instead, she had to make it a battle. Some people can't admit they're wrong. It's like a personality flaw that just gets worse when they have power." Jim nodded. "Well, the new board has a strict policy now. Any HOA expenditure over $500 requires a vote. No more secret projects that benefit a few people at everyone else's expense." "That's good governance," I said, taking a sip of my beer. "And we updated the covenants too. There's now specific language about utility connections and property boundaries. No more gray areas that people like Brenda can exploit. The security cameras I'd installed during the conflict remained up. They'd proven their worth not just during the break-in, but several times since. I'd caught a package thief on camera and helped police identify someone who'd been vandalizing cars in the neighborhood. The initial invasion of privacy concerns I'd had about pointing cameras at my property were long gone. My gas bills did drop significantly after the disconnection, confirming my suspicion that I'd been paying a lot to heat that greenhouse. Over the course of a year, I saved about $1,400, which was more than Marcus had initially estimated. Apparently, Brenda's orchids had needed consistent warmth even during Arizona's mild winters. One unexpected consequence of the whole situation was that I became something of a local expert on HOA disputes. 3 different neighbors came to me over the following year with their own HOA problems, asking for advice. I wasn't a lawyer, but I could point them in the right direction and warn them about the pitfalls I'd encountered. In one case, I helped a neighbor fight back against unreasonable fines for having the wrong style of mailbox. The HOA had changed the approved mailbox styles without properly notifying residents, then started fining people for non-compliance. With my help, she gathered evidence, got a lawyer, and the HOA ended up having to refund fines to a dozen homeowners. The whole experience also made me much more aware of HOA regulations when I helped friends look for houses. Several people asked me to review HOA documents before they made offers on properties, and I became pretty good at spotting red flags. Overly broad enforcement language, vague definitions of violations, and boards with too much unchecked power. 2 years after the greenhouse incident, I ran into Richard Patterson at a local hardware store. It was the first time we'd been face to face since the trial. He looked older, tired. There was an awkward moment of recognition, and I thought he was going to just walk away, but he stopped. "Tyler," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." I was surprised. "Okay. What we did was wrong, all of it. The gas line, the break-in, all of it." Brenda was so worked up about those plants and about being challenged that she couldn't see straight, and I went along with it instead of being the voice of reason. "I appreciate you saying that. The probation, the community service, it was humiliating, but it was also a wake-up call. We'd gotten so caught up in HOA politics and control that we lost perspective on what actually matters. Neighbors helping neighbors, community, respect. We forgot all of that." "How's Brenda doing?" I asked, genuinely curious. Richard sighed. "She's in therapy. Took her a long time to admit she needed it, but she's working through some things. Turns out she had a lot of control issues stemming from childhood stuff. Doesn't excuse what she did, but it explains it. That's good that she's getting help. Look, I know we can't be friends or anything after what happened, but I wanted you to know that some good came out of it, at least for us personally. We're working on being better people. That's all anyone can do," I said. "Learn and move forward." We shook hands awkwardly and went our separate ways. I thought about that conversation a lot over the next few days. It's easy to demonize people, to make them into villains in our personal stories. But Brenda and Richard were just flawed people who'd made bad decisions, escalating a situation that should have been simple to resolve. That said, I never regretted disconnecting that gas line. Setting boundaries isn't mean or petty, it's necessary. They'd been taking advantage of me without my knowledge, and when I found out, I had every right to stop it. The fact that they couldn't handle being told no wasn't my problem. The greenhouse itself actually thrives now during the warmer months. Several neighbors grow vegetables there, and Jim set up a system where people can sign up for plots. It's become a genuine community amenity, the way it probably should have been from the start. During winter, the plants naturally go dormant or get moved inside, and nobody expects free heating from someone else's gas line. I still live in Meadowbrook Estates. Despite everything that happened, it's a good neighborhood. The houses are nice, the location is convenient, and under Jim's leadership, the HOA actually adds value rather than just creating headaches. We've even started a neighborhood watch program and a community email list for sharing information about local events and concerns. Sometimes people who are considering moving into the neighborhood ask me about the HOA, having heard rumors about the greenhouse incident. I tell them the truth. There was a problem with previous leadership. It was dealt with appropriately, and the current board is fair and reasonable. Most of the time, that's enough to reassure them. The legal bills from the whole ordeal were substantial, even though I recouped most of them through settlements. Marcus Chen earned every penny I paid him. He was strategic, thorough, and never let the HOA's lawyers intimidate him. More importantly, he helped me understand the process and kept me calm during the most stressful parts. One thing I learned is that documentation is everything in these situations. Every email, every letter, every photograph I took became crucial evidence. If I just disconnected the gas line without documenting everything first, the outcome might have been very different. The HOA could have made a much stronger case that I'd acted improperly. The security camera footage of the break-in was particularly vital. Without that video evidence, it would have been my word against theirs about what happened that night. They could have claimed they were on HOA property, not mine, or that they'd had permission. The video made their guilt undeniable. Looking back now, 3 years after finding that first violation notice on my phone, I can see how much I've grown from the experience. I'm more assertive about protecting my rights, more knowledgeable about property law and HOA regulations, and more willing to stand up to unreasonable demands from anyone, not just difficult neighbors. The whole situation also taught me about the importance of community involvement. If more homeowners had been paying attention to what Brenda was doing as HOA president, the greenhouse situation probably never would have happened. She was able to act with impunity because most people didn't bother attending meetings or questioning board decisions. Now I attend every HOA meeting, not because I enjoy them, but because I've learned that the price of a peaceful neighborhood is eternal vigilance. When residents disengage, people like Brenda fill the vacuum and start making self-serving decisions that benefit them at everyone else's expense. The greenhouse incident became something of a cautionary tale in local HOA circles. Marcus told me he's used the case as an example when advising other clients about property disputes. Apparently, it hit the right combination of clear-cut legal issues and dramatic escalation to make it memorable. I still have all the documentation from the case stored in a fireproof safe. The original permit showing the unauthorized gas connection, every violation notice the HOA sent me, the police reports from both the supervised disconnection and the break-in, the court documents, everything. Part of me hopes I'll never need any of it again, but another part of me knows that you can never be too careful when it comes to protecting your rights. The relationship between the residents who supported Brenda and those who supported me eventually healed, mostly. There were a few holdouts who remained convinced I'd been unreasonable, but they were a small minority. Most people, once they understood the full situation, recognized that the HOA had been in the wrong from the start. Susan Miller and Carol Henderson remained on the HOA board for another year before stepping down. Susan moved out of the neighborhood entirely, selling her house and relocating to Temp. Carol stayed but kept a much lower profile. Without Brenda's dominating personality driving them, they turned out to be reasonable people who just hadn't been willing to stand up to her, the orchids that had started the whole mess. They all died that night when the temperatures dropped into the 20s. Brenda had apparently invested thousands of dollars into those plants over the years, some of them rare varieties that she'd carefully cultivated. In her mind, I destroyed something precious and irreplaceable, but that wasn't my responsibility. She'd built her hobby on top of theft, using my resources without permission to support her passion. When that theft was discovered and stopped, the consequences were hers to bear, not mine. I didn't owe her free gas any more than I'd owe a neighbor free electricity or water. The legal principle that came up repeatedly during the case was unjust enrichment. The HOA had been unjustly enriched at my expense by receiving free gas for their greenhouse. Once I became aware of the situation, I had every right to stop it. Their lawsuit claiming I destroyed their property by disconnecting the line was fundamentally flawed because they'd had no right to be connected in the first place. If someone builds a structure on your foundation without permission, you're not obligated to maintain that structure. If someone taps into your electrical line without permission, You're not obligated to continue providing them power. The gas line situation was no different, but Brenda's sense of entitlement had convinced her otherwise. The most surreal part of the whole experience was how many people initially thought I was being unreasonable. "It's just a greenhouse," they'd say. "Why are you making such a big deal about it?" But it wasn't about the greenhouse. It was about principle, property rights, and refusing to be taken advantage of. If I'd backed down, what would have been next? Would the HOA have felt entitled to tap into my water line for a community fountain, my electrical line for holiday decorations? Once you let people violate your boundaries, they just keep pushing further. Standing firm cost me time, money, and stress, but it also earned me respect. The neighbors who initially thought I was overreacting eventually came around when they understood the full scope of what had happened. They realized that if the HOA could get away with stealing from me, they could get away with doing the same to anyone. Jim's leadership of the HOA also showed everyone what competent, honest governance looked like. He focused on real issues like maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and ensuring compliance with important safety regulations. He didn't waste time on petty violations or power trips. Under his leadership, HOA meetings became productive rather than contentious. The neighborhood newsletter, which Brenda had used primarily as a platform to scold residents about violations, was transformed into an actual community resource. It now featured upcoming events, local business recommendations, and helpful information rather than just being a list of people's transgressions. 3 years after the initial violation notice, my life in Meadowbrook Estates was actually quite pleasant. I had good relationships with most of my neighbors. The HOA functioned properly without overstepping its bounds. My gas bill was reasonable, and I had the satisfaction of knowing I'd stood up for my rights and won. The greenhouse, now operating seasonally without stolen heat, produced tomatoes, peppers, lettuce, and herbs that various neighbors enjoyed. It served its intended purpose as a community amenity without requiring anyone to subsidize it unwillingly. That's what should have happened from the beginning, and it's what finally emerged after all the conflict and legal action. Brenda and Richard's house went on the market last month. Jim mentioned it casually at a neighborhood barbecue, saying they were relocating to Nevada to be closer to family. I felt no particular satisfaction about them leaving. The whole situation had been unnecessary, a conflict manufactured by pride and entitlement that could have been avoided with simple honesty and fairness. Their departure would probably be good for them and good for the neighborhood. Too much bad history had accumulated here. A fresh start somewhere else, with the lessons they'd learned from therapy and legal consequences, might allow them to be better neighbors in their new community. As for me, I'm staying put. This is my home, and I've invested too much in it, both financially and emotionally, to let anyone drive me away. The neighborhood is better now than when I moved in, and I played a role in making that improvement happen, even if the path to get here was more difficult than it should have been. The story of the greenhouse and the gas line has become part of Meadowbrook Estates lore, a tale that gets told to new residents as a warning about what happens when HOA leadership goes rogue. It serves as a reminder that homeowners need to stay informed and involved, and that boards need to operate transparently and fairly. Every time I see that greenhouse through my back window, I think about how a simple conversation could have prevented everything that followed. If Brenda had approached me 3 years ago and said, "Tyler, we just discovered the community greenhouse is accidentally connected to your gas line. The HOA will pay to have it properly disconnected and set up its own heating system," I would have said fine. Problem solved. But she couldn't do that because it would have meant admitting the HOA had made a mistake. It would have meant spending money the board had already allocated elsewhere. It would have meant treating me as an equal with rights rather than as a subject to be controlled. And so instead of a simple solution, we got lawyers, police, criminal charges, and a neighborhood divided. The whole experience reinforced my belief that most conflicts escalate not because of the original issue, but because of how people respond when confronted. The gas line connection was a mistake, probably made by a contractor 5 years ago who took the path of least resistance. The crime was when Brenda discovered that mistake and decided to force me to continue absorbing the cost rather than having the HOA take responsibility. I've since had conversations with friends in other HOAs who face similar situations, not necessarily about gas lines, but about boards overstepping their authority and individual homeowners trying to push back. My advice is always the same. Document everything, know your rights, get a good lawyer, and don't back down if you're in the right. Sometimes people ask if the stress was worth it. Could I have just agreed to keep paying for the greenhouse heating and avoided all the conflict? Sure, I could have. But that would have cost me roughly $1,400 a year for as long as I lived in my house, potentially tens of thousands of dollars over time. More importantly, it would have established a precedent that the HOA could violate my property rights, and I'd accept it. No amount of conflict avoidance is worth surrendering your fundamental rights. The stress was temporary. The principle was permanent. As I sit on my back patio now, enjoying an Arizona evening, I can see that greenhouse through the trees. The tomato plants are thriving, tended by Jim and a couple of other neighbors who enjoy gardening. It's become what it should have been all along, a genuine community resource that enhances the neighborhood without coming at anyone's individual expense. The notification on my phone that started this whole journey feels like it happened in another lifetime, though it's only been 3 years. That violation notice for Section 47B, demanding I heat a greenhouse I didn't build, use, or authorize, set in motion a chain of events that changed my neighborhood, taught me valuable lessons about standing up for myself, and ultimately made Meadowbrook Estates a better place to live. Would I do it all again, knowing what I know now? Absolutely. The right to control your own property and not be forced to subsidize someone else's project is fundamental. When the HOA demanded I heat their greenhouse, I disconnected the line and let everything freeze. It was the right decision then, and I'd make the same choice today without hesitation.